additionnels pour aider à empêcher ces variants d'entrer au pays. Sachez que nos experts et nos scientifiques suivent de très près l'évolution de ces variants dans le monde. On comprend d'être inquiet et on prend cette situation extrêmement au sérieux. Et sachez qu'on agira toujours de façon à vous protéger. We all need to do our part to keep ourselves, our loved ones, and our neighbors safe. That's every person, every business working together. And now, Canada's air carriers are stepping up to protect Canadians too. The government and Canada's main airlines have agreed to suspend service to some destinations right away. Air Canada, WestJet, Sunwing, and Air Transat are canceling air service to all Caribbean destinations and Mexico starting this Sunday up until April 30th. They will be making arrangements with their customers who are currently on a trip in these regions to organize their return flights. I'd like to acknowledge the leadership of Air Canada, WestJet, Sunwing, and Air Transat in making this commitment to suspend flights and be such strong partners in the fight to curb the spread of COVID-19 and its variants. We appreciate the work the Canadian Airlines and their frontline workers have done to make air travel safer and to bring Canadians home when this pandemic struck last spring. With the challenges we currently face with COVID-19, both here at home and abroad, we all agree that now is just not the time to be flying. By putting in place these tough measures now, we can look forward to a better time when we can all plan those vacations. Our government is committed to the safe restart and recovery of the Canadian travel and tourism sector as soon as conditions improve, ideally later this year. As part of this effort, the Government of Canada is committed to work with the major airlines on the future relationship between testing and quarantine requirements. This will enable the safe, gradual return to international air travel grounded in science and ethics. On top of these flight cancellations, we're bringing in other measures as well. Starting next week, all international passenger flights must land only at the following 4 airports: Vancouver, Calgary, Toronto, and Montreal. In addition to the pre-boarding test we already acquired, as soon as possible in the coming weeks, we will be introducing mandatory PCR testing at the airport for people returning to Canada. Travelers will then have to wait for up to 3 days at an approved hotel for their test results at their own expense, which is expected to be more than $2,000. Those with negative test results will then be able to quarantine at home under significantly increased surveillance and enforcement. Those with positive tests will be immediately required to quarantine in designated government facilities to make sure they're not carrying variants of potential concern. We will also, in the coming weeks, be requiring non-essential travelers to show a negative test before entry at the land border with the U.S. We're working to stand up additional testing requirements for land travel. Aujourd'hui, je peux annoncer qu'à partir de dimanche, les vols entre le Canada et les destinations soleil, précisément les Caraïbes et le Mexique, seront suspendus jusqu'au 30 avril. Air Canada, WestJet, Sunwing et Air Transat ont accepté de faire partie de la solution pour protéger la santé et la sécurité des Canadiens. De plus, le plus vite possible en février, nous ajouterons un second test obligatoire à l'aéroport quand les passagers arrivent. En attendant le résultat de ce test, les voyageurs devront rester en quarantaine à leurs frais à un coût de plus de 2 000 $ dans un hôtel supervisé pour une durée de 3 jours. Si ce test est négatif, la quarantaine pourrait se terminer à la maison, mais avec des mesures de surveillance accrues. Ceux qui testent positif feront leur quarantaine dans un centre de la santé publique pour s'assurer qu'ils ne sont pas porteurs d'un nouveau variant du virus. Il y a plusieurs raisons légales, logistiques et pratiques qui font en sorte que des décisions comme celle-ci ne doivent pas être prises à la légère ou sur le coin d'une table. On va toujours garder une approche rigoureuse pour prendre des décisions réfléchies et efficaces qui prennent en compte l'ensemble des facteurs et des conséquences. Vous le savez, depuis le début de la crise, ma priorité, c'est de protéger les Canadiens. Il faut continuer de travailler ensemble. Les gens ne veulent pas voir des chicanes politiques sur le dos de la pandémie. Concernant les vaccins, mercredi, j'ai parlé avec la présidente de la Commission européenne, Ursula von der Leyen, qui m'a confirmé que les mesures prises par l'Europe n'affectent pas les livraisons des vaccins de Pfizer et de Moderna vers le Canada. We learned yesterday that there will be a delay affecting many countries, including Canada, for the next shipment of the Moderna vaccine, which arrives next week. We will receive 78% of the expected amount, translating to 180,000 doses. I want to be clear. We will always share the most accurate information we have, but in the short term, those numbers can fluctuate. But as global production continues to pick up, there will be more stability in the system. And most importantly, this temporary delay doesn't change the fact that we will still receive 2 million doses of the Moderna vaccine as planned before the end of March, as we've been saying for months. On vaccines, I had another call with the global CEO of Pfizer, Dr. Albert Bourla, who confirmed yet again that we are still on track to receive 4 million doses of their vaccine before the end of March. We also talked about Canada receiving more doses ahead of schedule starting in the spring. We'll have more details to share on that next week. Production lines around the globe are adapting to high demand from every country. We're focused day in and day out on getting a vaccine to every Canadian who wants one by the end of September, and we are very much on track to do just that. Since the beginning of this pandemic, our priority has been protecting you and your family. And just like that means securing vaccines, it also means making sure that kids are safe at school. I've had a chance to drop in on virtual classrooms across the country. From Edmonton to Miramichi, I've been reminded about just how resilient kids are. That doesn't mean it isn't tough for them, too. Emily at St. Martha's in Kingston told me that school is hard these days because of COVID. To Emily and her friends in Mrs. Owl's class, and every kid out there listening, you're doing a great job. So keep it up. With this second wave, your schools need support to keep you safe, protect your teachers, and make sure you and your friends can continue learning wherever you are. So today, I have some important news to share with you. We've now reached agreements with all provinces and territories for the second installment of federal funding through the Safe Return to Class Fund. This $1 billion investment will go towards everything from more sanitizer to better ventilation for classrooms to support for online learning and remote classes. Bien sûr, l'éducation est de compétence provinciale. Et comme je l'ai dit au Premier ministre lorsqu'on a annoncé le fonds pour une rentrée scolaire sécuritaire l'an dernier, c'est un principe qu'on respectera toujours. Les provinces et les territoires pourront se servir du soutien qu'on leur apporte avec ce fonds pour aider les écoles, les enseignants et les élèves pendant ces moments difficiles. Déjà, la première moitié de l'argent investi à l'automne a fait une grande différence pour les élèves et le personnel à travers le pays. The teachers, support staff, students, volunteers across the country, you're doing a remarkable job. The lessons you're teaching our kids, resilience, critical thinking, compassion, will serve them and our country for the rest of their lives. Things will get back to normal, and until then, we will keep having your back. Canada, peu importe votre âge, où vous vivez, tout le monde mérite de se sentir en sécurité. En septembre dernier, la mort tragique de Joyce Echequan nous a rappelé à quel point le racisme systémique existe encore dans notre pays. C'est inacceptable qu'il y ait des membres des communautés autochtones qui subissent la discrimination dans nos systèmes de santé. Hier s'est conclu un deuxième dialogue national durant lequel les participants ont renouvelé leur détermination à éliminer le racisme systémique dans le milieu de la santé. Pendant ces échanges, des partenaires autochtones ainsi que des intervenants et des représentants du domaine de la santé, de l'éducation et des provinces et des territoires ont pu s'exprimer et partager des pistes de solutions pour améliorer nos institutions. Je tiens à souligner le travail du ministre Miller qui a lancé hier aussi le début des discussions pour co-développer une loi sur la santé des Autochtones fondée sur les distinctions, dans le but d'assurer des soins de santé de grande qualité pour tous les Premières Nations, les Inuits et les Métis. Il est plus que temps qu'on mette fin à toute forme de discrimination et de racisme dans nos systèmes de santé au Canada et il faut continuer à travailler ensemble pour y arriver une bonne fois pour toutes. Just like we need to end systemic racism in our healthcare systems, we also have to address gender-based violence in our country. Far too many women and girls were already facing violence, and this pandemic has only made things worse. Since the beginning of this crisis, we've provided $100 million to organizations and shelters in support of victims of gender-based violence. And there's still so much more work to be done. Last week, ministers from different orders of government responsible for the status of women endorsed the joint declaration for a Canada free of gender-based violence. This joint declaration affirms a common vision to put a stop to violence against women and girls and is an important step in developing a national action plan to end gender-based violence in Canada. I want to thank Minister Monsef and all ministers involved for their important work. Pendant qu'on lutte contre la violence fondée sur le sexe, il faut aussi continuer à combattre toutes les autres formes de violence et de haine. Il y a 4 ans ce soir, un attentat terroriste islamophobe au Centre culturel islamique de Québec a coûté la vie à 6 personnes et en a gravement blessé 19 autres. Aux familles et aux proches des victimes et aux membres des communautés musulmanes partout au Canada, je sais que ça fait encore mal. Au nom de tous les Canadiens, on est solidaires avec vous. On est tous unis pour défendre nos valeurs de diversité et d'inclusion. Nos gestes comptent et nos mots aussi. Les commentaires racistes, les propos haineux, les insultes des trolls, la désinformation, que ce soit en ligne ou ailleurs, ont des conséquences réelles. Il faut en être conscient et il faut continuer d'agir. On a pris plusieurs actions concrètes au cours des dernières années. On a fait des investissements pour protéger les Canadiens dans leurs lieux de culte et assurer la sécurité des collectivités à risque. On a lancé des initiatives pour lutter contre la haine en ligne. Et l'an dernier, on a aussi banni des modèles d'armes d'assaut pour empêcher que de telles tueries se reproduisent. What happened 4 years ago tonight in Quebec City was an unthinkable tragedy. We cannot and we will not ever forget. That's why January 29th will officially become the National Day of Remembrance of the Quebec City Mosque attack and of action against Islamophobia. Le 29 janvier deviendra officiellement la journée nationale de commémoration de l'attentat à la mosquée de Québec et d'action contre l'islamophobie. Every year on this day, we will honor the victims and we will recommit ourselves to fighting the discrimination and hate that took them from us. No one should ever be afraid because of the way they pray, not in Canada and not anywhere around the world. Today,
and always, we must stand strong and united, because that will always be our path forward. I think that's something we've all been reminded of over the last year as Canadians have come together to fight this once-in-a-generation crisis. Cases are slowly decreasing because everyone is doing their part. So thank you, and keep it up. I also want to thank the many people who are making sure that no one gets left behind, no matter where they live. Together, we've overcome the vast geography and the tough winter of this country to get more than 10% of the adult population of the territories already vaccinated. It just goes to show that we have the plan and the team to get this done. More vaccines are on the way. Spring is coming, and together, we're going to get through this.
Thank you, Prime Minister. We'll now turn the phone for questions. One question and one follow-up. Operator.
Thank you. Merci. First question, Charlie Pinkerton, iPolitics. Line open.
Good morning, Prime Minister. We found out earlier this week that it was only a matter of days after the National Research Council's vaccine partnership with CanSino was announced that your government found out that China's government was effectively blocking the deal by not issuing the proper documentation to allow for the initial ingredients to leave Beijing's airport. We only learned of the holdup about a month and a half later when who was supposed to be the lead on the clinical trials for CanSino's vaccine here in Canada mentioned it while speaking to a House committee. Later in July, you said your government was working with the Chinese government to ensure that work could continue in an uninterrupted fashion. What were you hearing from China's government about this over the summer? And what about Canada's dealings with China over the last 2+ years led you to believe that there would be any other outcome other than the deal eventually dying as it did?
From the very beginning of this pandemic, we demonstrated that we were going to work in every way possible to keep Canadians safe, whether that was bringing in record amounts of PPE or developing domestic capacity, whether that was working with all sorts of different companies and scientists and researchers on supporting vaccine research so we could get more doses for Canadians. We were ready to knock on any door and work in a focused way to get Canadians the support they needed. That's exactly what we did. Obviously, the relationship and partnership with CanSino, which had been very effective in developing an Ebola vaccine a number of years ago, wasn't one that panned out. We kept trying to see if it could be made to work. But that is part of why we made such a concerted effort to sign more deals with more potential vaccine makers around the world than any other country to arrive at a point where we have more doses per person than any country in the world that we have secured for Canadians. Obviously, we kept working every different direction we could because Canadians expected us to be doing everything possible that might help save lives and get us through this pandemic.
And follow-up, Charlie?
Yeah, well, this deal, it fell apart before your government had any other vaccine deals in place. So I guess I'm wondering, why wasn't your government more transparent about how this was going over the summer? And were you stalling just before the other deals were reached?
We continued to work in parallel with many different companies and potential producers of vaccines. We kept working even on deals that looked like they might not be working out because we knew that making sure we had every opportunity to give Canadians whatever vaccines ended up being successful was our priority. So we kept working away and trying to make sure that we would get the best possible outcomes for Canadians, and that's exactly what we've ended up with more deals with more different vaccine producers than any other country, and indeed more potential doses per person than any other country in the world. That is the work we did and we continued to do throughout last year.
Merci. Prochaine question. Operator.
Thank you. Merci. Prochaine question, Hélène Buzetti, Le Devoir. À vous.
Oui, bonjour, Monsieur Trudeau. J'aimerais revenir à l'annonce du jour. D'abord, vous nous annoncez que les compagnies aériennes suspendent certains vols. Je me demandais s'il y a des compensations financières qui ont été offertes par votre gouvernement pour obtenir ce résultat. Et vous nous aviez dit plus tôt cette semaine qu'il y avait un risque à suspendre les vols parce que ça pouvait affecter les chaînes d'approvisionnement. Alors, est-ce que c'est encore le cas? Et si oui, quelle alternative avez-vous trouvé?
Tout d'abord, les conversations avec l'appui pour notre industrie aérienne continuent. On a de très bonnes discussions avec les compagnies aériennes. Nous reconnaissons à quel point c'est important pour le Canada d'avoir un secteur aérien en santé, compétitif, réussi. Une fois qu'on sera passé à travers cette pandémie, et nous allons être là pour appuyer les lignes aériennes. Nous reconnaissons et remercions les compagnies aériennes au Canada d'avoir pris cette décision avec nous de protéger les Canadiens et d'empêcher des vols aux Caraïbes et au Mexique pendant les prochains mois parce que c'est pas le temps de voler. On va continuer de travailler avec eux pour s'assurer que justement on ait une industrie aérienne en santé à la fin de cette pandémie parce que je sais qu'il va y avoir beaucoup de Canadiens qui vont vouloir prendre ces vacances et ces voyages une fois que les conditions de santé publique le permettront. Par rapport aux chaînes d'approvisionnement, on est toujours en train de s'assurer qu'on continue à avoir de la résilience et de la certitude à ce niveau-là. En termes de chaînes d'approvisionnement, il n'y a pas énormément de denrées ou de biens qui pourraient être affectés avec ces vols vers le sud des destinations soleil, mais on est toujours en train de regarder attentivement pour s'assurer que des vols essentiels ou des déplacements essentiels puissent se faire. We have continued to work with the airline industry in Canada. We know that it's going to be extremely important to have a flourishing, thriving, competitive airline industry in Canada once this pandemic is done. I know a lot of Canadians are going to want to start traveling again as soon as the public health requirements allow it. And we need to make sure that our airlines are healthy and present to be able to respond to the demand that Canadians will bring once we're through this pandemic. That's why the conversations with these airlines continue, but I really do want to take a moment to salute and thank the leadership of Canada's main airlines for having taken this step to keep Canadians safe during the heart of this difficult wave of the pandemic.
Oui, j'aimerais revenir à cette quarantaine aux frais des voyageurs. Bon, vous avez dit que ça serait jusqu'à 3 jours et que ça pourrait coûter 2000 $. Donc, je ne sais pas dans quels hôtels vous allez les mettre, mais ça me semble que ça paraît cher. Alors, pouvez-vous juste donner plus de détails sur ce 2000? Est-ce qu'il faut qu'on comprenne, par exemple, parce que vous avez dit que si le test il est positif, on irait ensuite dans des installations de santé publique, si j'ai bien compris. Est-ce qu'il faut comprendre que ce 2000 $-là pourrait inclure donc des frais d'hébergement pour ceux qui resteront 14 jours? Merci.
C'est une très bonne question, Hélène, et on va avoir évidemment plus de détails à annoncer dans les jours à venir, mais les grandes lignes, c'est d'abord quelqu'un qui revient d'un voyage non essentiel, quelqu'un qui arrive au Canada dans un des 4 aéroports qui va recevoir des travailleurs de l'étranger, va devoir passer un test immédiatement. Avec l'achalandage, avec le testing privé qui va être exigé de faire parce qu'on ne veut pas enlever des tests qui sont essentiels ailleurs en société à cause de ces voyageurs. Le test sera aux frais des passagers. Ils vont devoir attendre jusqu'à 3 jours pour recevoir le résultat de ce test. Ils vont attendre dans des aéroports approuvés des hôtels approuvés par Santé Canada, mais à cause des mesures extra que ces hôtels doivent faire pour assurer la sécurité des travailleurs qui sont en début de quarantaine, ça va être plus cher. Donc, on s'attend à ce que le coût du test de dépistage privé, le coût de 3 nuits qui doivent booker à l'hôtel à l'avance, tourne autour du 2 000 $. Évidemment, si après 2 jours, il y a un résultat négatif, ils vont pouvoir rentrer chez eux ou ils vont compléter leur quarantaine sous des conditions strictes et avec une surveillance accrue. S'ils testent positif, ils vont être envoyés dans un centre de quarantaine gouvernemental pour finir leurs 14 jours. Et ça, je crois que, comme on a fait avec les centres de quarantaine du gouvernement, ce ne sera pas à leurs frais, mais ils auraient déjà dépensé les 2 000 $ pour l'hôtel pendant 3 jours qui est exigé pour quiconque revient d'un voyage à l'étranger.
Merci. Next question, operator.
Thank you. Merci. Next question, Ryan Tumulty, National Post. Line open.
Yeah, good morning, sir. I'm wondering what's driving your decision to focus this intently on travel? Is it the variants? Because as you said, and as the data shows, travel is not a big driver of cases inside Canada's border. Is it the variants that's driving this concern?
We know that these variants represent a real challenge. We've seen public health modeling that shows what happens if these variants do take hold in Canada. We saw that one travel case resulted in many cases of the UK variant in and around Barrie and expanding. We know that just one case of the variant that comes in could cause significant challenges, and that's why we need to take extra measures. Yes, it is extremely low, the percentage of cases that are traced back to international travel, but it's not zero. And making sure we are doing everything we can, which includes mandatory testing on arrival and a mandatory 3-day hotel stay while they're waiting for the results of that test, so that anyone who's positive gets into a government quarantine center where they can be closely monitored for variants, is an important step to take on top of all the other steps that we've already taken, like the pre-boarding test that we're now demanding, the ban on all foreign nationals in terms of non-essential travel that's been in place since March, along with the quarantine measures that have been in place since March, measures that just now the U.S. is adopting. Oui, nous sommes très préoccupés par l'arrivée potentielle de variantes de ce virus. On a vu dans le cas de Barrie en Ontario qu'un cas de ce virus peut se répandre facilement dans des institutions, dans une communauté, et donc nous devons tout faire pour empêcher l'arrivée des variantes. Donc, l'élimination de voyages non essentiels vers le sud, par exemple, les mesures accrues de dépistage à l'aéroport à l'arrivée des passagers et un début de quarantaine dans un hôtel à côté pendant qu'on attend le test. Ça fait partie des mesures et pour décourager les voyages non essentiels, mais aussi pour s'assurer qu'on est en train de mettre un système en place qui va attraper le plus possible des nouveaux cas de coronavirus.
And a follow-up, Ryan?
Yeah, sir, when you talked with the head of Pfizer today, were you able to come to some understanding on this 5-dose versus 6-dose per vial issue? And did he commit to providing 4 million doses even if Health Canada rules there are only 5 doses in the vial? And I'm also wondering if the Moderna reductions will extend to just next week or throughout the month of February.
No, thank you for your questions. No, in my conversation with the head of Pfizer, we talked about the question of 5 doses versus 6 doses. Health Canada is right now analyzing the state of extraction of doses in Canada, the necessary techniques, training, equipment necessary, and they will make the decision to ensure the right decision on the 5 doses versus 6 doses question. But I got assurance from the head of Pfizer that we are continuing to be on track to receive the doses committed to by the end of March, as planned, as we've been saying from the beginning. And furthermore, he made very positive and encouraging comments about the possibility of bringing forward doses from Q4 to Q3, from Q3 to Q2. But those are things that we'll be able to talk about in more detail once we have better confirmation next week. In regards to Moderna, we are very preoccupied with that supply chain. We are, of course, watching closely on that supply chain, but the announcement Moderna has made on a reduction of about 20% across the board on deliveries for this coming week is only for this shipment and should be returned to normal on the next shipment.
David Aiken, Global News. Good morning, Prime Minister. I want to come to these travel restrictions. Even before today's announcement, we had restrictions on mobility. Public Health Agency of Canada officials have been briefing the airline industry and others saying, even if we all get vaccinated by September, you should not assume those mobility restrictions are going to disappear. Can you confirm that, and can you tell Canadians, who are making all this sacrifice, in October, in November, will international travel resume in any shape, way, or form? What's it look like? What are we all doing this for once we all get vaccinated?
We're doing this to keep as many Canadians alive and healthy as we can through this pandemic. We're taking difficult measures now so that we can get through this quicker, so that we have less damage to our economy, to our industries, to our workers, to our lives. This is something that Canada is focused on, and that's why we've brought in so many different restrictions on international travel from last year, because we knew that keeping Canadians safe needed to be our first order of business, not just for the health and safety of Canadians, but for the health and safety of our economy as well. If we want to come roaring back strongly, we need to make sure we are minimizing the disruption and the damage done by cases across this country. In regards to when we're going to get to travel again, when things are going to go back to normal, that's the question we've been asking ourselves every month since last March. When is this going to be over? We're going to keep doing the things that will end it as quickly as possible. And that means staying home, staying safe, getting vaccines here as quickly as possible. What Canada will look like this summer, what Canada will look like this fall, we certainly hope that there will be far fewer restrictions, that we will be able to be back to a more regular life. Whether our international allies and partners will be at that same place is something we're going to have to look at carefully before we reopen international travel, before we get back to normal. We're working in a concerted way, as focused on this as possible, to make sure we get through as quickly as possible, and that's all we can do, and that's what we're continuing to do.
I'm just looking perhaps for a little more precision on the when question. So as public health officials, your cabinet thinks on the when, you'll be looking at a variety of factors, I assume. Case counts, distribution of rapid testing kits, all sorts of things. Can you be a little more precise, saying once we hit these sorts of markers, we can then start thinking about resuming some sort of normalcy? Can you be more precise on that?
Well, let me give you an example right now. We're very much looking at what the spring budget is going to look like, and how much or what elements of a recovery stimulus we put into that budget will depend very much on where we are and where we think we are in terms of the economy reopening, things getting back to normal. There are many, many different things we're looking at in terms of how we get back to normal. Not all of them are in our direct control as a government or even as a society. For example, the effectiveness of vaccines in preventing reinfections or preventing spread of COVID-19. There are many things that are still being looked at, and we will always bring in all those factors to make the right decisions for Canadians and for our economy. We said from the beginning that we'd have Canadians' backs and we'd get through this the best way possible. That's exactly what we're on track to doing.
Good morning, Prime Minister. Kevin Gallagher from CTV National News. You're calling these tougher travel restrictions, but for weeks, premiers have been asking for something even stricter, a total ban on international travel, something the opposition parties seem keen to support. especially with the new variants that surely aren't all coming from sunshine destinations. So why not have stricter measures even with travel? And in fact, why isn't your government acting sooner on this?
We have some of the strictest restrictions on travel of any of our allied countries around the world. And today, with these further measures, we're announcing even more measures. They're going to keep Canadians safe. The mandatory testings on arrival for anyone arriving in only our 4 main international airports. The mandatory wait time in a local approved hotel for the results of that test, the cancellation of flights to sun destinations and to Mexico. These are things that will significantly reduce the risk of importation of new variants across the country. But we, as always, have a multi-layered approach that works with partners to ensure both feasibility and maximum safety for Canadians in a way that is responsible, and that's exactly the balance that we've struck.
Hello, Prime Minister. Mike Blanchfield, Canadian Press. Some questions on the contracts with the different vaccine makers. The United States has released redacted contracts with vaccine suppliers months ago. The European Commission has asked its suppliers to release the contracts, and AstraZeneca has apparently done that today. The Commission also says it wants to publish all of its contracts in the near future. Why is Canada insisting on keeping the details of these contracts from the public, from the taxpayers who are spending the money? What is your thinking for that? Is it pressure from the companies? What's at play here?
Our priority every step of the way has been getting the largest number of doses as quickly as possible from as many different companies as possible for Canadians. That has driven us every step of the way. It drove us to sign more contracts with more companies than most of our allies. Certainly it drove us to secure more doses per person than just about any other country in the world. And that thinking is what drove us furthest and fastest every step of the way in negotiating and signing contracts with various vaccine companies. At the same time, we have always tried to be as transparent as possible, both on what we've spent globally on vaccines, but also more and more details as they are made available. We will continue to work with vaccine companies around the world in order to share as many details as possible with Canadians. But every step of the way, our focus is first and foremost on getting the help to Canadians they need as quickly as possible, and we're not going to risk jeopardizing that.
Hi, Prime Minister. Tom Perry, CBC. Has Moderna told you what's causing this disruption, and have you received assurances from the company that it's only the one shipment that's going to be reduced?
I spoke with the head of Moderna last week, I believe, or earlier this week. It all blends together. And he talked about certain concerns they had around the manufacturing process. This momentary reduction in production is something that they've told us is only going to be for this one shipment at this point. It's just a 20% reduction. We're still going to get over 170,000, I think, vaccines from Moderna in this current shipment. But we know that this is something we're going to have to keep watching very, very closely. We still remain very confident we're going to get all the doses that we secured from Moderna by the end of March, as expected, as planned. We will continue to work closely with them. But again, the numbers on vaccine arrivals in this new process where industrial processes are being stood up around the world from scratch for these vaccines, we always expected them to fluctuate a little bit, which is why we work so hard to, first of all, establish good relations with these companies, to sign deals and contracts with these companies early on to have a larger range of potential vaccines for Canadians, and where we are confident that we are going to be able to hit the big milestones that we laid out to Canadians. Getting doses in December was an extra, was a bonus, was something we were able to do that got us to stand up our supply chains in a more efficient way. But It wasn't something that we had necessarily planned for. It was something we were able to work for and get. Getting a number of doses in Q1, we had assurances that we were going to be able to get 6 million doses of vaccines by the end of March, and we are still very much on track for that. And that is the number that we have consistently shared with Canadians, and that is the number that we are going to hit despite momentary delays and fluctuations that are hitting countries and productions around the world. We also remain very much on track to getting every Canadian who wants to get vaccinated by September. That is something that I can reassure Canadians on, and that's what we're working on. We are going to get there.
En français, mais juste sur la partie sur qu'est-ce qui explique le retard de Moderna, là?
Moderna nous a partagé, quand j'ai parlé avec le PDG de Moderna il y a quelques jours, et aujourd'hui, ils nous ont partagé qu'il y a des délais et des défis de production qui ont causé une réduction temporaire sur l'envoi de cette semaine de 20% des doses de vaccins, une réduction qui affecte tous leurs clients à travers le monde, et ils nous rassurent que on va être de retour à la normale pour les prochains envois et évidemment, on va quand même pouvoir atteindre nos cibles pour la fin mars de vaccination de doses de Moderna. Donc, les gens peuvent être rassurés qu'on est encore en ligne et on est encore en vue de recevoir les doses promises sur l'échéancier promis.
Bonjour, M. Trudeau, Laurence Antoine, Radio-Canada. Pour les voyageurs donc, qui reviennent de l'étranger, qui vont passer 3 jours à l'hôtel, s'ils reçoivent un test négatif, ils peuvent continuer à faire leur quarantaine à la maison. Vous dites qu'il va y avoir une surveillance accrue. Qu'est-ce que ça veut dire concrètement? Est-ce que vous pouvez nous donner des exemples concrets là, de à quoi ça va ressembler, cette surveillance accrue? Et qui va s'en occuper? Qui va être responsable? Qui va payer pour ça?
Pour la surveillance accrue, pour les quarantaines obligatoires, on a doublé les effectifs du fédéral en termes d'appel et de suivi. On a embauché des compagnies de sécurité privées pour aussi aider à faire ces suivis. Et évidemment, depuis le mois de mars, la police locale de juridiction a le pouvoir et la responsabilité de participer à ces suivis. Depuis les débuts, on a vu que la police de Vancouver, la police provinciale de l'Ontario et d'autres sont très actifs à faire ces vérifications et de participer et de travailler en partenariat avec nous. Et nous espérons continuer de pouvoir travailler avec tous les corps policiers à travers le pays pour surveiller de façon plus attentive ceux qui auront à suivre ces quarantaines suite à un test négatif dans les 3 jours avant, en retournant de voyage à l'étranger. We have increased surveillance and enforcement measures of mandatory quarantines. From last March, we've been working with police of jurisdiction who have the authority to ensure local police forces, provincial police forces have the authority to follow up on quarantine requirements. We've seen police from Vancouver to the Ontario Provincial Police to elsewhere stepping up and being part of this monitoring of quarantine. We are increasing the number of calls we're making from the federal government. We're hiring private security firms to help with those follow-up. And of course, there will be a particular focus given on returning travelers who've gone through the process of the 3-day test results when they come back. Pas d'autres questions? Il fait tellement chaud aujourd'hui. Spring is coming, we hear.